Oh, that's smoking. Oh God. The speedometer on my 43-year-old Audi Quattro finally gave up, and that's gonna be a problem. So let's bring it in the garage and see what it's gonna take to fix this thing. Shouldn't be too hard to find one of these. They did import 600 something of these cars into the US. $800 on eBay, and this one says a small crack visible in photos. If this car was some kind of museum showpiece, I would definitely consider spending the $800 on a cluster, especially if I found a nice one, but it's not. So in the meantime, while I'm processing what to do here, let's work on something else that's much more of a priority. I took the Audi Quattro on a 350-mile road trip throughout Oregon with some friends of mine. It took us about 14 hours to complete, and the Audi did great, except for one little thing. Right before I left, I fixed this alternator bracket, and guess what? It broke again. I'm not sure if it was from over tightening it, but eventually this piece broke off the bracket, allowing the nut to fall off the bolt, and then the bolt started backing its way out. The only thing keeping the bolt from falling out was the alternator belt itself. As soon as I pulled over and realized it, I used some duct tape and some zip ties to keep that bolt from moving around, and not only did the car finish the drive, but I drove it like this for another month. But now I think it's time that we fix this legitimately. Since we're going through all this trouble, I figured I'd replace the alternator. This one's pretty beat up, the pulley's a little bit bent, and it's also got some broken fins on it from hitting who knows what. This thing looks pretty old, so I bought a new one that's 220 amps. In the future, I'm thinking about possibly having electric air conditioning in this car, so I wanted to make sure I had one that was nice and powerful. The alternator doesn't quite fit, and unfortunately, that's not something that's uncommon on my car. Rather than returning this and trying to order another alternator that might not fit, I'm just gonna cut this little shim off because I think that'll get me pretty close. So we'll see. All right, that's definitely fitting now. Get this alternator belt back on here. And then I've got my Heim joint. It'll just bolt to the place it did before and then bolt to the bottom of this. That Heim joint's not perfectly straight, but it seems like it's working pretty well. It's exactly what I had in my head when I originally thought of this idea. I just didn't think I was gonna have to make that bracket, which is what ended up failing anyways. So glad to get rid of that. I'm gonna tighten up all those bolts and I think the car will be ready for a drive. Another episode of Dad Fixes Everything.
Thanks, Dad.
Oh, you're welcome. Here you go.
Thank you.
The Quattro had a really great week. I ended up driving it all the way to Vancouver, Canada, which was probably close to 700 miles round trip, and it did great. Didn't have to turn a single wrench, which made me really happy, and I'd love to say that that alternator is finally fixed. So what do you think? We pull this cluster apart and see what's wrong with it after our nap? Luckily, these old cars come apart pretty easily. It's usually just a few screws, and I've done this before when I took it apart the first time to clean off the mold from the gauge faces, and the trip odometer was broken. A lot of the stuff just ends up getting corroded and rusted because the car sat for so long at the previous owner's house, just undriven and rotting away. I went back on eBay and found an Audi Coupe GT cluster, which is really similar to these Quattro ones. It just doesn't have a boost gauge, and it said it was for parts only, that it wasn't working, but I have a feeling they just didn't have a way of testing it and they didn't want to warranty it. So I bet a lot of the stuff is still working on that. At the very worst case, I should be able to at least steal the lens off of it because the one on my Quattro is pretty nasty and cracked, and this one is really nice. The way these old speedometers work were pretty cool. There's actually a little cable that was attached to the back of the speedometer that goes down inside the transmission, and that thing spins, and on the tip of it there's a magnet that goes up against another magnet and spins the speedometer. You can take a drill and spin the back of this thing to test out the speedo, so I should probably do that. I should probably just double check mine too. Make sure that's the problem. Oh. Well, we must have a different problem. Either way, I'm still curious to plug this thing in and see what works on it. You never know when like a spare tachometer or something might come in handy, so pretty sure these plugs are the same. All right, almost thought that plug wasn't gonna fit, but it did. So this thing's kind of crazy, it's all over the place. When I put the hazards on, the check engine light comes on. Yeah, the rear window defrost turns on the headlight light. Oh, that's smoking. Something is smoking back there. Smoke's definitely never good. There's probably a capacitor or something that can't handle the amperage coming through the whatever that switch is doing for the rear window defrost. But I do want to start the car up though and see if the tach works. I don't think the fuel gauge even worked. I wasn't really looking. That's cool, so the tach is working. I'm pretty sure the water temp gauge is functioning as the gas gauge, and that's kind of weird that the oil sensor is on because there's plenty of oil pressure. Oh, and now the shift light is on. Interesting. Turn signal light still doesn't work. Clearly this Audi Coupe GT cluster was not too happy in my car. Pretty much nothing worked properly on it except for the tach, and who knows if it was even accurate or not. But was it a waste of money? Definitely not, because this lens alone is worth the $80 to me. It's pretty much the going rate for a replacement lens on any car. That's what I paid for the one on the E30, so that makes me happy that I can steal that. Even this bezel and some of the stuff inside of here, some of these little plastic pieces are definitely worth it. So let's disassemble this thing and cannibalize it. We can see how things work, and maybe I'll figure out what the heck is going on with that little cable in there that controls the speedometer. You can see what I'm talking about, the gauge face not being in great condition, which is actually pretty unfortunate because I liked this design better than mine, but this one only goes to 120 miles per hour, so probably would be tough to get it accurate. This paint just completely flaking off whatever this is, the screen print. It's making me want to drive the car and see what's going on with that cable. So I'm gonna take this one apart and kind of organize all the parts with what I want to keep and toss, and then I think we'll take the car for a drive and see if that cable spins, because it must be broken. I don't even need to leave the neighborhood. I can already see that the cable's not spinning. It should be, even going slow, should be spinning somewhat. So that means there's either something wrong with the cable or the gear in the transmission that's attached to it. That thing wasn't even moving at all, and I found it kind of weird that I wasn't able to turn it by hand, like it's completely seized. You'd think that if it was broken, then it would just spin freely, so a little confusing to me. This is probably gonna be something that's easier to replace on the lift since it's pretty far down there. Oh, whew. That thing was in there really tight. It's out. Oh, I have found the culprit. All right, everyone wage their bets. What's this gonna cost me? 50 bucks, 100 bucks? $7.99, that's what I'm talking about. I finally got my hands on that brand new speedometer gear. It looks exactly like the old one, so we're gonna throw it in the car and then we can start digging into that cluster. It's probably a horrible shirt to wear for this. I was really hoping we'd be able to just throw this GT Coupe cluster in the car and be on our way, but clearly it's a bit different and a couple things weren't happy, so that's not gonna work out, but we're still gonna try to cannibalize some of these plastic parts. I've got like a broken earlobe off on mine here, so I'm gonna take this plastic piece off and put it on there, swap it over. I've also got quite a bit of rust on the back of mine. I'm gonna try to clean that off and get these nuts nice and clean because these are grounds usually for everything that's on the cluster, whether it's the tach or the temp gauge, all that stuff needs to have good grounds, otherwise it's not gonna work properly. So I'm gonna very carefully take these apart so that I don't tear this ribbon board. We're gonna put it all back together and then I'm gonna take some pictures of the gauges and I'll show you why. Definitely feel like I'm doing a little more damage than I am helping. The ribbon board is just so incredibly fragile. As I unscrew these nuts, it's tearing the tiny little eyelets that are on the ribbon board because they're practically super glued to these nuts with the rust. I could probably end up seeing myself jumpering some of these with some little wires just to make sure that it has good continuity. Unfortunately, these plugs too are kind of weird, so I don't know. When I start putting this thing all back together, we're just gonna have to be testing tons of stuff with the multimeter, making sure it's all working. And if this huge thing is like a giant mess of wires at the end, then so be it. As long as it works, I'll be happy. I've been looking for gauge faces for this car for months now and haven't really found anything because it's not exactly a very common car. There were some guys in Europe that were talking about making me backlit faces for it, and it seems like they've kind of lost interest in me. So what I ended up doing was I vectorized them on Illustrator so I could make sure that all the colors, all the fonts and everything were exactly the way I wanted it to be. And then I went on one of those family photo websites and I made my gauge faces fit in 5x7 photos, and I made the scale perfect by bringing the photo up on my laptop and measuring it with my calipers. Then I had them print a bunch of different finishes and just a couple of different sizes just in case. And here's what I ended up with. So obviously these aren't stickers, they're photos, but instead of relying on the regular sticky back of like a vinyl sticker, I'm actually gonna try using some more professional type spray because I'm hoping these last at least a decade. So let's try a little test with one of the ones I'm not gonna use and we'll see how it works. So I'm not actually gonna stick these to my original Audi Quattro gauge faces. I'm gonna store these away in my box of Audi Quattro parts that I'll keep forever. I'll sand down all the nasty paint that are on the Coupe GT ones, and we'll stick our actual printouts to these once we complete our little experiment over here. I don't think we're gonna have any problem with these faces staying stuck to the gauges. It seems like that glue is really permanent. I'm almost done sanding the faces down and making them nice and smooth, but now I realize that they're raw steel, so they could potentially rust. I'm just gonna throw a light coat of paint over them, and then we're gonna glue them together, and hopefully there's not some weird chemical reaction with the glue and the paint, but I think we'll be okay. Everything is coming together really well with sticking the faces on these gauges. The glue and everything is working just as good as I could have hoped. It's just really hard not getting any fingerprints on anything. I'm cutting all the circular holes with these hole punches that are actually made for leather, I think, but they're working really good to cut these perfectly circular. So next, once I get this all put together, I'm gonna start polishing off the lens, and we'll be pretty dang close to putting this back in the car. Getting the scratches out of the cluster lens is actually pretty easy. I just went at it with some 2000 grit sandpaper for a few minutes and got those to disappear. Now it's just a little bit hazy. I obviously wouldn't put it back in the car like this, but you'll be surprised to see how fast this gets polished up and looks almost brand new once I start hitting it with that polishing compound. Unfortunately, taking this cluster apart did a little bit of damage to the ribbon board. If you remember how rusty some of these nuts were that were holding on some of the grounds, I did tear it a little bit in some places, but now that I'm putting it all back together, I'm using some brand new washers, some brand new nuts to help make sure there's continuity with a lot of these things. There's already some stuff that didn't work on this cluster, like the turn signal indicators weren't functioning. So we're gonna plug this thing back into the car and see what's all working, what's not, and if I need to diagnose something and kind of reverse engineer, figure out where the circuit is broken, we'll do that. I'm just gonna start with the simplest thing, hopefully no smoke this time. So hazards. All right, we've got the hazards. Now we'll key it on. I've got the battery light because the alternator's not running, and I've also got the brake light because the e-brake's up, so that's great, so good so far. And the turn signal indicators actually work for the first time since I've owned this car in 2 years. It's a little bit hard to hear the click when you're driving, and I would end up leaving the turn signal on a lot of times driving this car, so that's really cool. The last thing is the tach. If I can get the car started. I just gotta plug in the boost gauge and that speedometer cable, but looks like the fuel gauge is also working, so we're looking really good. I pulled the cluster out because I forgot to lubricate the speedometer cable. I forgot that I had bought this $25 can of speedometer cable lube, and this will actually help your speedometer from bouncing. If you have a speedometer that kind of wiggles like that, it's because it's not spinning freely. Apparently you just spray this stuff down in there and drive it for a little bit. Oh God. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do both things at once. Everything is working really well, and that makes me so happy. A lot of this stuff is really important to be able to see all of these indicators and things on the cluster. If your alternator belt flies off, you want that battery light to come on and tell you before the battery actually dies, you know, and having the little creature comforts like the turn signal indicators and everything, those are really important. There's a reason that they're there. So I'm really excited how it all turned out. The gauge faces are pretty cool. You know, gloss is cool. I don't love it or hate it really. I can see why you would want to have flat ones to reduce the glare, but I might do something different in the future. It was actually pretty easy. So I'm really excited to drive this car more and take it on some road trips. Maybe we'll drive it in the snow this winter. So looking forward to that. Check your polarizer.